Alright, so last spring, I set out to swap an FA24 into my VA-WRX for under $3,000 all in, less than the value of my working FA20. So I did that. I've been dailing it for the last 9 months, and now 12,000 miles later, after helping more than 20 people get their swaps on the road, I'm going to go over everything you need to know to do the swap yourself, and I'll show you how much the swap cost for me, and then how much it's going to cost for you, which is actually less than it cost for me. So I ended the last video with the first start of the car where it made a really nasty sound. And I thought the engine blew up, either from the junkyard, maybe it sat with water in it, maybe it was blown when I pulled it, or from me messing it up when I did the head stuff, timing or whatever. So I was freaking out, and I tried to debug the setup, like, oh, maybe something's rubbing, that's spinning, maybe the crank wheel's weird, and I tried to look inside of it. I checked the oil, it looked fine, there was no metal in it. I bought a compression tester, I compression tested it, and actually it was fine. Everything kept coming back normal, no issue, no issue, no issue, no issue, repeatedly. So it took a couple days debugging, and during that time, at some point I noticed the sound was definitely coming from the driver's side, right? And it turns out it was a high pressure fuel pump. And when I looked at the FA24 service manual before the swap, I saw a picture of the cams in one of the exploded views, and I compared it to the FA20 service manual's exploded view picture, and they were exactly the same, roughly. So I thought, okay, well, the cam specs are the same in the cam spec table. They visually look the same. They appear to be aligned exactly the same way in these pictures. I think we're good for the swap with the FA24 cams. After I figured out it was the high pressure fuel pump making the noise, I started to doubt that, right? The high pressure fuel pump is cam driven. So I went through looking other sections of the service manual because I really didn't want to pull the engine and take the thing apart. And I actually found the issue, which is great. So deep in the service manual, there's a picture that shows the differences between these two. So the cam lobe on both cars is a triangle. And for some reason on the 2.4s, Subaru rotated our triangle. So when the ECU went to send the control pulse to the high pressure fuel pump, the high pressure fuel pump was in a different stroke. So the control pulses just were not doing anything. And what happens in the high pressure fuel pump with these control pulses is when you get the pulse, the ECU opens a spill valve, and that lets the piston in the pump push the fuel back into the lower pressure fuel line, which lowers your effective rail pressure since you're compressing less fuel than you would if you didn't push any fuel back where it came from. So if you were to unplug your high pressure fuel pump, it'll run at maximum pressure since there's no spill valve to let the fuel back out, and it's compressing all the fuel that it takes in. When their cam lobe is clocked differently, you're getting your pulse on a downstroke instead of the upstroke. And so you're just running at maximum pressure, right? Full PSI. And in the 2.4 pump's case, this is 4,000 PSI. So after a few days of digging through the ECU, I had a solution for this timing, and I was able to take the car on its first drive, which I showed actually at the end of the last video. And it worked great. And actually the day after that, I drove the car to work just fine. And then after work, I went to a family dinner. That was more than 500 miles round trip. And then ever since then, the car has been actually perfect. No check engine lights, no issues, nothing. A few months later, I drove it 3,000 miles round trip to Boxerfest with namr, and I saw some people there, which is cool. So the swap's been reliable. It's been great. So now let's go over everything you need to know to do it. So first and most importantly, if you want to use the 2.4 cams, right? If you want to drop in a sealed long block from a 2.4, you need to use Atlas to tune your car. And you're going to be using your 2.0 ECU. You cannot use the 2.4 ECU. As far as I know, none of the other tuning platforms have the tables you need to make these cams work. So I'll have a base map for sale on my site that sets everything up for you to do these swaps. So it'll handle this high pressure fuel pump cam timing issue. It'll handle some other issues we're going to talk about later. And then the base map is editable, right? So you can have a pro tuner tune it. You can have me tune it. You can tune it yourself, anything you want. So next, let's talk about accessories, since that was one of the unknowns from last time, right? So I found out very recently, the accessories are even easier to deal with than we thought before. So first, you're going to need an alternator from an FA24. I bought a used one from an Ascent. The FA24 swap document says that you should tie together all 3 control wires from the 2.0 harness. And this is something I hadn't really looked into because I knew it worked. You don't actually need to do this. The 2.4 alternator uses LIN-bus as its kind of control system. And so it doesn't get any useful signals from this 3-wire tied together thing. So what I did is I just unplugged it and drove around for a couple weeks, and it worked totally fine. So then I'm like, okay, well, maybe this 3-wire plug arrangement is for check engine light or warning light in the dash. And I snipped all the connections together, so now we have 3 independent wires. And I looked in my dash, and there's been no warning lights, no check engine lights, nothing. So actually, the solution to making the FA24 alternator work is to just not plug it in at all, which is great. Nice and easy. So next, for the AC compressor, when I did my swap, I bought one from the Ascent. I wired it up. I made lines for it, but it turns out you can just reuse your FA20 compressor. So there's a cradle on the engine block for the 2.4 compressor, take it off, put your 2.0 compressor on, and you're good. So this makes the swap just a lot easier and gets rid of, I think, the biggest barrier to entry on these swaps, which is making the AC lines, because that sounds really scary. So now here's some video on how to make the AC lines if you want to use the 2.4 compressor for whatever reason. If you don't care, skip ahead like 90 seconds. All right, so the problem here is that the fittings on our FA24 compressor are the wrong size for the fittings on the VA chassis air conditioning lines. And so our goal is to take fittings off of either Amazon or off of an Ascent for the compressor side and match them up with our body side fittings from the VA-WX. And to do that, we're going to cut up the lines that we already have on our car and then put in the metal fittings from the new one. And an air conditioning line is fundamentally just a rubber hose around a metal fitting, kind of like a fuel line or a vacuum line, but it's held tightly with that metal crimp. And so what you want to do is you want to cut long ways along that metal crimp, and that'll let you split it apart with a screwdriver or with a tire spoon. And once you're done with that, you can take the old metal fitting out and put your new metal fitting in, mock it all up, make sure it fits, make sure you have enough slack, and then you can use the crimper on there. And with the crimper, you buy them from Amazon, and you're going to be using the size 10 SRB and size 8 SRB. 10 SRB is for the firewall side, and then the 8 SRB was for the condenser side. And once you have that, you can recharge your air conditioning like normally, and mine is held up for 6 months or so without any issues. All right, so now for the engine itself. Again, like last time, you use the stock 2.4 injectors, 2.4 high pressure fuel pump, 2.4 NOx sensors, 2.4 coolant oil temp sensor. I use the FA20 fuel pressure sensor and FA20 oil pressure sensor since the threads were the same and it was one less or two less harnesses to deal with. So now with the intake manifolds, there's some new information, actually makes things easier. So with the swap, you're going to end up keeping TGVs in some form or another, which makes it emission friendly and green speed friendly, whatever. So to do this, the 2.4 manifold has a TGV assembly kind of built into it, right? The flaps, the rod are stuck in the plastic and it's not a separate piece like the FA20s was. And then on the side of the manifolds, it has a motor sensor assembly thing with the same bolt pattern as the 2.0. And they look very similar to the 2.0. They have a different colored sticker, but the harness connection is exactly the same. The issue is the voltages that it spits back out at the ECU are flipped from left to right. But what you can do is you can take off the motor sensor assembly, it's just 2 bolts for each side, from the 2.0 TGV and put them on the 2.4 TGV. You know, driver side to driver side, and then passenger side to passenger side. And that's it. It works for the most part. And this most part, some people are getting a P2005 code, which is driver side stuck open on startup. And this isn't actually a real code. Like the TGV is operating just fine. It has its full range of motion. And actually, the check engine light is looking for basically range of motion and then kind of like a center set point of the range of motion effectively. And so the two manifolds have a slightly different range and a slightly different middle set point. This sometimes upsets the ECU. Most of the time it doesn't upset the ECU. So it's doing some extra check at the start in some conditions, and that is what's triggering this code. And it's only ever the driver side, apparently. And not everybody gets it. But so the base map that I sell fixes this problem, and it does it without deleting the code because that's not allowed. Okay, so while we're on the topic of the intake manifold, we'll talk about the throttle body. So they're in different places on the 2.0 and the 2.4 manifold. The 2.4s is centered and it faces backwards. The 2.0s, it still faces backwards, right? But it's offset. And so if you have a front mount intercooler right now, you have an easy solution, which is buy some couplers from Amazon and maybe a pipe. You cut the pipe to be the right size and you can kind of shift your end point a couple inches so that you end up right on the throttle body again. You also don't have to buy a pipe. You can 3D print them with ABS like I did. And actually they held up just fine 6 months or something and they didn't break. I just swapped them in for another project I'm working on. But anyway, if you have a top mount for your 2.0, you won't be able to use it. You'll need a top mount from the 2.4. And this is kind of a problem because the intercooler inlet on the 2.4 is different from the 2.0. And you can't just buy a 2.4 charge pipe because the turbo outlet is different between the motors. But what you can do is you can buy one charge pipe for each motor. So one FA20 pipe and one FA24 pipe. And you cut them in half with an angle grinder. And then you use a coupler to join them together. I know people that have done this with stock charge pipes, you know, the plastic ones. And also some people have done this with the aftermarket pipe. So it's a relatively easy solution. You just have an extra part to source. The throttle body itself, you can use either the 2.4 or the 2.0 throttle bodies. But the 2.0 has a raised edge that helps keep the intercooler pipes from coming off. And so I'd recommend that one. For the manifold pressure sensor, they actually changed the pinout on the 2.0 and the 2.4 sensors. They basically inverted the wires, which is really annoying. So previously I'd used a patch harness to convert these, but actually you can just use the 2.0 map sensor directly directly in the 2.4 manifold, and it's pretty easy. So all you have to do, drill out the little hole on the mounting tab of the sensor itself. So don't drill through the main sensor body, right? Just the little hole that's on the side of it. And that'll let you screw it into the FA24 manifold perfectly fine. And then you can just use the stock harness. And you might have to cut some tape to get enough slack to reach there, but it does reach there without, pulling on the cable. Okay, and then going down the list, you use the FA24 EGR. So if you have an EGR code, it's real. You actually do have a problem. Same with any check engine light for the swap. All right. Brake booster. On the FA20, you have an electric vacuum pump. On the FA24, you have a cam-driven mechanical vacuum pump. I use the FA24 pump, but if you do this, you'll end up with a brake warning light on the dash. You can put a resistor across the connector, or you can just reuse the electronic pump. I liked how the mechanical pump felt more than the electric one. Okay, now Evap. So you reuse the Evap from the FA20. You probably could use the FA24's Evap. I didn't try it. Anyway, some people have had problems routing these hoses, so I'm going to try and make it as clear as possible. We'll start from the firewall, right? You have two lines coming out of your firewall. One of these is an actual fuel line, right? Actual fuel is in there. Don't touch that one. The other one's your Evap line. On the FA20, this goes from the firewall into a metal pipe on the block, and that metal pipe splits it into two lines. And then one line goes into each Evap solenoid. So our goal in general, right? You turn one single Evap line into two Evap lines so that each solenoid has a connection. And you can do this two ways. You can either use the metal pipe from your 2.0. It just won't have an attachment point, so it might rattle around. Or you can use a T-fitting. I tried both. At first I used the metal pipe, but then it rattled around, so I swapped it for a T-fitting. And on your Evap solenoids, the side opposite from the wiring harnesses is the side that gets the line from the firewall. All right, and remember, both solenoids get a line from the firewall. And then on your smaller solenoid, the line closer to the wiring harness is going to go down into the turbo inlet. There's a spot for it. And on the later model years, that spot has a wiring harness on it too. And for that, it will give you a check engine light if it's not plugged in. So you can take the plastic piece off your original line and you can put it on your new line for the FA24, and then you'll be good. And now for the leftover port on the big solenoid, this one's going to go into a T-fitting. And on this T-fitting, one line is going to go into the manifold on the only vacuum port on the manifold, which is right on the bottom. And you're going to need a size adapter for this. And then once you have that sorted, the other side of your T is going to go down to the bypass valve, the reference port on the bypass valve. I want to emphasize that everything under the block, you recycle from your FA20. Your headers, your turbo, your downpipe, your turbo inlet, your boost controller, your intake, all of it is from the FA20. And the reason we have to do this is the 2.4's turbo uses an electronic wastegate that the 2.0 ECU just cannot drive, right? So we need our air-based boost control system still. These parts have no idea they're attached to a 2.4, right? All the mounting points are exactly the same. There's also a few PCV lines, I think they're PCV lines, that have wiring harnesses on them for the later model years. The check engine light checks if this plastic part is plugged in. Okay, I think that covers all of the hardware. It really is an easy swap, probably a max of like 2 hours of extra labor compared to swapping in a 2.0. You should have no check engine lights when you're done, and I believe, but I don't live in an emission state, so I can't confirm. You'll be able to pass emissions with it, I think. So now let's talk about cost. For this spreadsheet, I basically rounded up each purchase price and then multiplied by my sales tax rate of 7% and then rounded up again to the nearest one. So I'm hoping that'll account for any little issue or thing I might have missed, or gas driving to the store, whatever. There's more than enough margin in here though. Like I easily made the 3K budget. The block was $2,100 after tax and the core fee, rounded up to the nearest 100. This isn't a particularly good deal. There's been a bunch of them for sale around this price. Don't buy one with timing cover damage. In my opinion, the timing covers are expensive and it's just more labor to do. The alternator was $110, compressor $100, pulley belt and lines were another few hundred, then little extra parts brought our total up to, we'll round up to $2,800. So $200 under budget for the part. Then we have our basic consumables. I went through a lot of coolant trying to find those EGR leaks, and being dumb, I spilled it everywhere. So I also went through a thing of paper towels cleaning up those spills. So I'm adding that to the cost. Oil and filter, $60. And then I got a new set of spark plugs. Also the RTV you can get for like $10. If you get Permatex Ultra Gray or Ultra Black, it'll be enough for that little cover, which is all you need it for. But I did the head studs, which I'm not including in the challenge budget. So I got a big thing of RTV, which is technically the OEM RTV. So I put that price in there. Okay, so now the kind of exciting part. If you use the 2.0 AC compressor, you can take $275 off the parts cost, $334 if you count the consumables, $454 if you count the crimping tool. Pretty much 10% off the swap. And now you can target under $2,500 for the swap, which is insane considering, FA20s go for double that really often. So to make the swaps more convenient for, anyone else doing one, I sell a harness adapter kit that'll let you plug the FA20 harness into the FA24 injectors and coolant temp sensor and oil temp sensor. And then also starting with Atlas 2026.1, I'll be selling the base map that I talked about earlier that'll let your car run. You can use this base map with any tuner you want, you, me, or another pro tuner. It has a custom patch to make the high pressure fuel pump timing work. I'm going to talk about this. So there's two methods for doing this. One is kind of a workaround by tricking the AVCS, and this works. It gives you pressure control. It's not ideal since it's really sensitive, and technically your AVCS reference is wrong. It'll take a lot of trial and error to figure out the exact value that this AVCS workaround should be set to. When I was developing it, it was really sensitive, so just changing the value by a couple points would ruin the fuel pressure control either in the low pressure direction or the high pressure direction. It was really sensitive. Keep that in mind. Now the other method, which is what I did for this base map, is you can change the hardware and crank angle logic for the high pressure fuel pump to match what's on the 2.4. And then also in the base map, I changed the AVCS reference code, so now the 2.0 ECU actually tracking the AVCS properly for the very slight difference in the cam timing wheel. I also set up the injectors with the right scaling in there. I don't think the other tuning platforms have the table that you need to set up the direct injectors properly, but this base map has that set up. All this is possible, of course, only with the Atlas software, which is free. You have full access to the tables, so you can tune the car yourself or have someone else tune it. The 2026.1 release will come out soon. It'll have a bunch of new stuff and bug fixes for the VA, and then support for a new OBD2 adapter that I'm releasing really soon, and then a bunch of other features that I don't think are announced yet, so I'm not going to talk about them. So stay tuned. Now, do I think the swap is worth it? To me, there is no reason to get an FA20 if your motor blows, right? The FA24 is cheaper, it makes more power, it's stronger, and it's not really any more labor than the FA20 to swap in. So really you're paying more and getting less if you buy another FA20. And I want to talk about the method of swapping. So there are other methods of swapping it than what I talked about in here. To me, the method I talked about in this video is the easiest and most straightforward. By using the manifold that came with the block and the cams and the injectors, you end up emissions friendly. You end up with no check engine lights even after, green speed emission stuff. And you end up with something that costs a lot less. I also see a lot of people talk about using the FA24 short block with their old FA20 head. I don't really understand why anybody would do this. Also, maybe I'm missing something. The long block is so easy to swap and they're so cheap. I mean, you could finish the swap in a day, right? Whereas if you swap the head onto an FA24 block, you have to get the machines, you have to take the engine apart, you have to do all this extra labor. So it doesn't make sense to me to do that unless you're looking for something specific. You can rev the FA24 just as high as you can rev the FA20. So you're not missing anything by keeping the long block. So finally, did I complete the goal swapping for less than what my FA20 cost? Actually, not yet. I haven't sold the FA20 yet. I ended up using it for parts development and I only listed it last week. So technically, I can't say yet that I beat my own challenge, even though it's been kind of a long time. One of the things I ended up using the block for was to make headers and put a bigger turbo on the car. I never would have trusted the FA20 with that. And I might make a video about the turbo kit. I set myself a goal of getting the turbo, the welder, the gas, the piping, all the gear, whatever, do big turbo for less than the cost of an off-the-shelf stock frame G30 770, which is about $2,000. So anyway, with this turbo, I'm actually out of fuel pump and it starts to drop pressure at higher boost. And so very soon you guys will see a solution for that. I did another cost challenge. So there will be a whole fuel system, entire fuel system for less than the cost of a popular off-the-shelf fuel upgrade. That's all I'm going to say for now. The WRX community has kind of dropped off a lot because it's so expensive to make any power. And then these engines are kind of known for blowing up still. And so you spend all this money to make a little bit of power and then your engine blows up and then you spend a ton of money just to get it back. That doesn't have to be true. I'm doing my best to try to change that with the swap and with the different things that I've worked on for the last year. So I'm going to be shifting my focus back towards this stuff instead of just developing Atlas. So there will be a lot more videos this year related to all that. So yeah, please share any information about the swap that you can. If I forgot anything or you have any questions, put it in the comment or send me an email. And thanks for watching. Please share with your friends.